Welcome to For Impact, the charity podcast. We're here to give voice to the sector and talk about the taboos and challenges holding it back and what we can do about it. Our topic today is the myth of the corporate golden goose, why corporate funding may not be the saviour the sector is banking on. I'm Felicia Willow, founder of Interims for Impact and a strategy and governance consultant known as the Mary Poppins of the charity sector. I work directly with charities on governance, strategy and change, and increasingly look across the sector to address the systemic issues that hold For Impact's organisations back. I'm joined by my co-host, Chris Pitt from the Benefact Group.
Hi, Felicia, and hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be here again, getting into a topic that is very close to my heart.
So in the current funding perfect storm, are corporates the superhero that will save the sector with their deep pockets and interest in doing corporate good? In this episode, we dive into whether corporate fundraising is really the saviour many charities hope for. We hear insights from corporate fundraisers, from research, and from corporates themselves, from the frustrations and horror stories to what actually makes partnerships work, explore mismatched expectations, the power dynamics between sectors, and why respect and professionalism matter as much as brand or size. And we uncover what you need to do if you're going to make corporate fundraising actually work for your charity.
Well, I feel pretty good today because of all the podcasts we've produced. I feel pretty well qualified to comment on this one, being the other side of the fence on corporate fundraising.
It's an interesting moment in time. For me, the incentive to do this topic is because I find myself in so many boardrooms where charities who have never worked on corporate fundraising before are turning to corporates as if they're going to be the quick fix, immediate solution to all their problems. And I'm not a corporate fundraiser, and my experience is quite limited in this area, but I do know that this is a really misplaced assumption.
Yeah, I think that there is a fair bit of money out there, but you're not wrong. Corporate giving is a big market, according to CAF, £4.2 billion worth. But it's also flat. Only 25% of companies give, and that covers cash, time, and goods. Cash is on the decline, with in-kind increasing. And this says to me that corporates are less keen on just writing checks. Instead, they're looking for strategic partnerships which deliver mutual benefit. So charities really need to think hard about what real partnership looks like and what they want to get out of it.
I think that's the real challenge, though, isn't it? Because to be really blunt, charities need cash. They want cash. Closures are getting out of hand. I mean, my company has overseen 4 closures this year. 2 of them are planned and 2 that were only identified as necessary once the financial reality was uncovered by your interim CEOs. So it's a really scary time out there. And I really understand why people think there must be an easy answer. You know, their cause is compelling. Surely one of the billionaires would just want to make an unrestricted donation that doesn't seem to cost them very much and can save the day. But I do actually honestly find it quite hard these days to respond politely when a trustee says, why don't you call Richard Branson or whoever the celebrity of the day is? Because it's become quite a triggering cliche in the sector. And I think it really demonstrates a lack of understanding about how tough fundraising is generally and corporate fundraising specifically. You know, fundraising is a profession. It's not a hobby. It's not easy. It's not just money there for the taking. But the reality is they do need that cash.
Yeah, I think all fundraising is hard. And I completely understand how hard corporate fundraising is in particular, being the other side of the fence. And I know, and I'm going to admit this, us businesses can be terribly difficult to work with. High expectations, maybe a touch of arrogance, and iffy commitment. But I think that's the poor end of the spectrum. I genuinely believe that corporates are getting far more thoughtful and strategic about how they want to work with charities. So both parties here are thinking about how to do it better. And there are some amazing examples of charities and businesses achieving far more together than they could ever do alone.
Great. Well, let's crack on and get some of those experts out there to tell us what's really going on. So today we're speaking to Andy King, the director of Fireside Fundraising, who has recently released research on why companies give. Rachel Holborough, a corporate fundraising consultant who has done research into the current realities of corporate fundraising. And Hiran Adia, a long-time corporate marketing leader who has worked across multiple corporates working on charity partnerships.
Hi, I'm Andy King, the director of Fireside Fundraising.
So you've been doing some research into corporate attitudes to corporate fundraising. Just tell me a bit about the research before we go on.
Yeah, of course. We wanted to understand why companies give in their own words. We know that there's huge amounts of data into individual giving. Like, you can tell that an individual is likely to either give to children or to animals, but not both. And so you can kind of divide individuals into children or animal donors, whereas with companies, we are still guessing as to who actually gets to make the decisions. So we wanted to speak to 20 people, from shareholders to marketing directors to HR assistants, to understand their perspective on why their company gives, to who they give to, and also why they stop. And we got some really interesting data out of it.
So, the $1 million question really is, are corporates just sitting around waiting to pour cash into struggling charities? Are they the ultimate rabbit in the hat for an overstretched fundraiser or a desperate charity board?
I would love to say yes, but as you will expect, no. One of the things that really struck us in the project is that companies don't have to give. And there's a kind of an attitude in the sector where we feel really strongly in our gut that they should. And because we feel that they should, it can be quite easy to forget that they don't have to, but they don't have to. And actually, the attitude that they should and they have to is one of the things that really holds us back. That desperation of, well, we need cash now, and like, you're bad for the planet and therefore you owe us money, is not going to save your charity. If anything, it's going to upset quite a lot of people and not really get you anywhere. It's worth saying the potential for corporate fundraising is significant, but it requires patience. Most partnerships take 6 to 18 months from when you send the first email, and that's after you've done your prospecting and worked out what you can offer. Like most income streams, it takes a while to break even and then make profit. So, like, does corporate fundraising have potential? Absolutely yes. Is it the rabbit in a hat? No. Desperate cash flow panic is kind of one of the worst things you can bring to corporate fundraising. It's not the income stream for that, and I'm not sure that I know what is.
Yeah, if only there was. So, what is needed then for successful corporate fundraising?
Yeah, great question. I would say it's really easy to look at it and think you need a big brand, but that's not actually true. The things that we heard in our research that companies need obviously varies because it's collections of people. And if you go to the research you can get freely on the website, we can talk about all the kind of dynamics you might need. But it really boils down to three things that are always needed, and then some other stuff that's nice to have. And those three things are compelling stories, decent data, and patience. Patience, going back to the point that we were talking about earlier of, like, it's not a quick income stream. Compelling stories, we need them to see why specifically they would give to specifically us. It's not enough to say the planet is on fire and that's everybody's problem. It needs to be, you are a food brand that appeals to children. We are a children's charity. It will help you live your value of bringing people together around the dinner table. The McCain and Family Fund partnership is a great example of just that. There needs to be kind of compelling reasons for those companies to give. The next thing you need is decent data. You need to be able to show that you're making a difference. You need to be able to have statistics and stories that they can put in ESG, environment, social and governance, or CSR, corporate social responsibility policies, stuff they can use on their internal channels so that they can tell their colleagues they're making a difference. It was really interesting how commonly it came up that data was the thing that held companies back from continuing to give. They wanted to keep giving, but they couldn't see the difference that their gifts were making. So, compelling stories, reasons why that company would give, decent data showing that them giving is making a difference, and patience, because as we've touched on, companies don't have to give. And so most of the time, the people you will be dealing with are doing it on the side of the projects that pay their actual bills. And so you need that kind of patience and understanding.
It's interesting because I think there is a bit of a perspective from members of the charity sector that corporates are sitting there with very deep pockets and nothing to do with that money, but give it away to charities. So, what did you find in your research about, what is going on from the corporate perspective?
It's really interesting to reflect on the fact that companies, while we on the outside think have these deep pockets and should be giving it to us, they don't feel rich and they don't feel like their pockets are deep. And there are two quotes that I'm really drawn to time and time again. The first of which was from a really fast growing insurance brand who said, "It is worth remembering that we owe our shareholders more than we owe you," which is just a really useful way of framing. It might be deep pockets, but it's not their money. It's their shareholders' money, and they have to convince someone else that they're going to spend that. And so it needs to have value to the shareholder because it's their money. It'd be a bit like if you're going to spend your child's inheritance on something, they're probably going to want to consent to that if you're lucky enough to have inheritance to give your child, obviously. And the other quote that I'm really drawn to was someone quite senior in a household name bank. And they said, "I get several emails every day from charities, and it feels like the way they ask for a donation is always the same. Yes, we know children are dying," or "Yes, we know that orangutans are dying. Yes, we know that people are getting cancer, but we need to know how this partnership will add value to our business." And what they showed me in that interview is that in the 45 minutes that we were together, they had received several first emails from charities asking for money. And they cannot say yes to everyone who asks simply because they have asked. And so they need a reason for specifically them to give to specifically you. And there are particular frustrations that are coming up repeatedly, the two of which that are probably easiest to mention are: one, feeling like you don't understand them, and two, feeling like you're not professional enough. The feeling like you don't understand them comes down to, do you speak their language? Do you know what their goals are? Do you know why they might give to you and which budget it might come from and why? And really commonly, they feel, it was a really common sentiment, that there are lots of assumptions going in where questions or curiosity would have done better. And the second point around professionalism is that charities are approaching in a scattergun way, asking everyone they can. One person referred to it as confusing passion for polish and being passionate not being enough. And they explained that they could have a great meeting and then they asked for a PowerPoint or a Word document proposal, and the charity people would often freeze. And they were like, "Well, again, it's not my money. I need to put this in front of someone else." And so being willing to speak their language and being willing to play their game, the game of professionalism, are the things that are frustrating companies that we're hearing of right now.
So I think it's really interesting what you're talking about. And this, I often talk about the fundamental mismatch in respect between the sectors, that it seems like a lot of commercial people look down on charities, see us as unprofessional or not to be taken seriously. Well, the charity sector can have a bit of a moral superiority complex and see corporates as evil. But we also see, I think there is a fundamental difference in the bottom line of our organizations. The charity sector has a bottom line of impact. The corporate sector has a bottom line of profit. Like, these things are so fundamentally different. And I think sometimes when you get these ideas of, let's bring commercial thinking into the charity sector, that they're actually missing that shift, that actually you can't. And, we are a different sector. And I think, it feels like in corporate fundraising, those tensions, both the attitudes, but also the fundamental difference in bottom line, has got to be a challenge in the corporate fundraising world. So how have you seen that kind of those tensions play out?
It would be simple if it was a one-way prejudice. But as you say, it isn't. Both sectors can be guilty of looking down on the other. That's not to say that everyone in both sectors looks down on everyone in the other, but you hear it all the time. You hear people say that companies are evil, and you hear companies say that people who work at charities couldn't make it in the corporate world. Those are both direct quotes from the research that we did. One person said that they feel that charity people are made of porcelain, for example, and a fundraiser said that they feel companies should want to work with us so they feel they have a soul. Those are both direct quotes. Like, this view of each other is real and out there. And what corporate fundraisers can do is take the time to understand each other and then translate. It's really important that we take the time to understand who the company is, what they do, why they do it that way, what their culture means to them, and that we take the time to explain to the company who we are, what we do, why we do it that way, which is a relationship that takes time to build. There are a million books about, for example, men are from Mars, women are from Venus, and yet we manage to build successful heterosexual relationships all the time because we get past the idea that we're different species, because, spoiler alert, we're not. It's the same. I will say that I hate dating metaphors for corporate partnerships because it's more like building a friendship group
Yeah.
than a marriage. But I do think in this case, they're like overcoming the othering. You just need to spend time with them, and you just need to actually get why they're like that. For example, lots of corporate fundraisers go to lots of fundraising networking events, but don't go to, for example, financial industry networking events. But if they want to stop seeing finance as evil and start seeing them as a potential force for good, spending time with them is a really useful place to go.
So if a board or a CEO or a fundraiser is listening, what would you advise them to do about all these challenges?
Yeah, it's a great question. And my first answer is breathe in and then breathe out, particularly because, as you said, a board or a trustee is usually coming to this at pace, expecting immediate results, and they need to take a step back because most of the time they're considering it, they are growing from a charity that has a trust and foundation background. And what they need to see more than anything else, corporate partnerships are not trust and foundations relationships. They are not just going to give you money because you do good things in the world. The very first thing I would do is I would recommend looking at some charity corporate partnerships. The Third Sector Charity Business Awards is great for that because they have so many categories that you can just see loads of partnerships and what they look like and what the company give and what the company expects. And that way you can start to cook having at least eaten once. So spend the time to work out what these partnerships look like and think about what they might look like for you. Who cares about what you care about? Not who should care, who does care. Spend the time breathing out and thinking about what your partnerships might look like, who they might look like them with, and be patient.
Great. And a special message to any board members who might have said this, but I think this is confirmed that Richard Branson is not just waiting for our call. Is that correct, Andy?
That is correct. There was a Freedom of Information request done to HSBC to ask them how many charities were approaching them for funding a year, and it is 10,000, which, in case you're wondering, is 4.3 an hour every hour. So while your listener is listening to this podcast, they have been approached 3 times, and they say yes on average 5 times a year. So no, they're not waiting.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for your time, Andy. Good to have you on the podcast.
Anytime.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm a corporate fundraising consultant and former charity leader. I help charities build realistic, values-aligned strategic partnerships with businesses.
Fantastic. Well, welcome on the podcast. I know you've spoken to over 100 fundraisers across the sector recently. What did you find out about how established corporate fundraising actually is? Are most charities really ready for it?
Short answer, no. Most aren't as ready as they'd like to think. Around 4 in 5 people told me their corporate fundraising is just starting or still growing rather than well established. So for most organisations, corporates still make up a pretty small slice of the pie. So we've got this really interesting tension where at the moment I'm hearing corporate being spoken about as a big growth area. Lots of charities are looking to diversify into corporate partnerships, particularly given the backdrop of the last 5 to 10 years, a real sort of retraction in statutory funding, big pressure on trusts and foundations, very crowded market. You can understand why a lot of boards and senior leadership teams are looking towards corporate and looking to diversify their income and looking at corporate as a potential growth area. But the reality on the ground is quite early stage. So we are seeing a lot of charities looking out to diversify, but perhaps not quite ready yet. Or in some instances, looking to fundraisers to do all of the work. You know, here's a target, here, go off and find, £100,000 of corporate income without doing the sort of basics, the clear propositions, ensuring you've got the impact data in place, ensuring your internal processes are up to scratch. And so I think what we're seeing is organisations realising the potential that corporate partnerships presents, whilst not quite having their own house in order enough to take full advantage of it.
What kind of inspired this podcast was, and I'm seeing a lot of boards just kind of say, corporates, the classic cliche of, just give Richard Branson a call. But it seems to be this idea that the corporates are going to rescue the sector from the perfect storm of funding that we have at the moment. So from what you've seen, how realistic is that expectation?
I think corporate fundraising can be hugely valuable, but it's definitely not a quick rescue plan. So partnerships that really tend to have a big impact tend to be multi-year. They tend to be quite high maintenance. You need quite a lot of resource and capacity to support it. And they're built on a real strategic values aligned fit, which takes time to develop. Like any good relationship, you have to put the effort in order to reap the rewards. So what I'm seeing is definitely a little bit of magical thinking. We'll plug our gap with some corporate income. Let's go and find some corporates to fill that hole without actually investing in the right capacity, the roles, the data, and the time to build the relationships. And that's not to say that you need a big team of people around you in order to capitalize on, corporate opportunity. But you do need to take a moment, I think, as a board and as a senior leadership team to sit down and have a really good, solid conversation and to put together a plan and to agree the parts of the plan that you as a board and you as a senior leadership team play. And of course, ensure that you do have some dedicated capacity to build corporate relationships, whether that's if you've got one fundraiser, ensuring that one fundraiser can spend 2 days a week on corporate partnerships, then and protecting that time for corporate partnerships is a place to start. It's a starting point. But I've been speaking to a lot of organisations who are coming to me, one fundraiser who already is absolutely stretched to full capacity, and the board and senior leadership team have now asked that they take into account the potential that corporate partnerships presents to their organisation. They literally have no time to spare, and the organisation hasn't agreed a plan in terms of how they're going to resource this extra growth area. It's not a case of going out and picking that money off the magic money tree. It's, you need to invest in proper resource and capacity and ensure that, you're organisationally ready for it.
So, Rachel, you've recently completed a big project looking into corporate fundraising in the UK. What prompted you to do that work?
It started really as a mix of frustration, personal frustration, and empathy, I think, for what I am seeing, but also what I've experienced, in my life as a fundraiser. I've spent 17 years fundraising in-house and have experienced some of this myself. And I kept hearing the same thing from fundraisers and charity leaders. We're told to grow corporate income, but we don't have the tools, the time, or necessarily the internal backing or understanding to do it properly. And that's creating such a huge amount of frustration in the sector. And I think it's contributing to burnout as well. So I wanted to take a bit of a step back and ask fundraisers, the people on the ground doing the job, how well established is your corporate fundraising? What does it feel like to do this work on a daily basis? What challenges are you experiencing? And what would actually help you do this work in a more meaningful, impactful way? So this research really is my attempt to put some data and some honest voices around that so that we can start to move from, wishful thinking to more practical steps in terms of how we establish more meaningful, prosperous corporate charity relationships.
Yeah, it does feel like so often fundraisers are just given the problem to solve rather than recognizing that fundraising is something that relies on the entire organization to succeed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you hear in this research about the pressures that fundraisers are under? What's making it so hard to build genuine long-term partnerships?
So a few themes came up over and over again. First, definitely capacity. It's a big issue in the sector at the moment. We're seeing it on a weekly basis, unfortunately. Teams restructuring, redundancies. It's out there and it's a real issue that organisations are facing. And unfortunately, fundraisers are not exempt from feeling the pressure of that. So teams are getting leaner. Vacancies often aren't backfilled. So you are getting a very stressed, overpressured fundraiser suddenly expected to take on the work of 2 or 3 people. And people are juggling new business, account management, reporting, sometimes having to, find the impact data as well, because that's not freely available. And pressure and capacity is a very big issue that I heard come out loud and clear from this research. Secondly, I think the market does feel tough at the moment. I heard from a number of fundraisers that there's more competition for fewer big opportunities, lower conversion rates, longer decision cycles, limited feedback sometimes from corporates that then makes it more difficult to inform the next opportunity they go for. And KPIs haven't really seemed to have shifted to reflect any of that. So I think what we're seeing is a lot of lonely, isolated fundraisers actually feeling under a lot of pressure to deliver high targets without feeling the backing of the whole organisation. And I don't think that that's intentional. Nobody intentionally wants to make fundraisers feel that way, but it is the byproduct, unfortunately, of what we're seeing. And thirdly, I think infrastructure was a big one that came out. A lot of fundraisers don't have the clear data on what needs funding, and this is such an important issue. There are very big targets that fundraisers are being asked to meet, but actually, I heard on a number of occasions, both in the quantitative data part of my research and also the qualitative conversations that I had afterwards, that sometimes fundraisers aren't even clear on what their case for support is, or if they landed a big partnership next week, what would it actually fund? What do you want to do how are you going to make a bigger impact as an organization in 5 years' time? And if you landed a couple of really big partnerships, how would they contribute to that? Well, organizations aren't answering these really critical questions, which means that fundraisers can't then go out and develop the types of high value, values-aligned, strategic partnerships that enable them to do this really important work. And so there's this real tension that's existing at the moment. And unfortunately, I think fundraisers are feeling the brunt of that.
Yeah, you've talked about this gap between intention and reality. So organizations saying that they're becoming more strategic, but they're struggling in practice. So what do you think is driving that disconnect?
I think that on paper, most people say their corporate fundraising has become more strategic, and I think that they want it to be. But when you look at how decisions are actually made, you still see this pressure to apply for almost every opportunity, so a go for everything mentality. Targets that are set by budget gaps more than realistic pipelines, and very little clarity on what we're going to do in the next couple of years and what we're not going to do. So a big driver is a lack of clarity at the top, I think. And if leadership and boards haven't agreed to the few types of partnerships they really want, fundraisers are left trying to be strategic in a system that's still really reactive. So the intention's there, but I think the structures, the targets, possibly the sign-off processes, resourcing, it hasn't really caught up.
One of the things I see a lot is this tension and the issue of respect and power dynamics between charities and corporates. I just finished an MBA. It was rampant through there. I see it when you get corporate trustees coming onto boards and sometimes misunderstanding the whole system. And then that kind of like tension that can come between those two sides, so to speak. Did your research pick up on any of that? And if so, what does it look like from the fundraiser side?
Yes, it came up a lot actually, both explicitly but also between the lines. So fundraisers talked about situations where corporates ask for extra impact or activity but don't underwrite the costs. So there's a pressure there to deliver more or to deliver outside of your core work or strategy because that's what the corporate wants. And there's a real feeling of fear in walking away from opportunities or saying no to opportunities. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier around, big targets. It's all linked to big targets that is not followed through with strategy. They spoke about access to beneficiaries or brand assets on terms that felt uncomfortable. So a real sort of expectation that if you are in partnership with a corporate, that means automatic access to, potentially sensitive subject matter or automatic access to brand on possibly uneven terms. And there was definitely a lot of talk around the opaque selection process where charities put in a lot of effort with sometimes very little feedback. So I think it often feels like from the charity side that they're absorbing the risk and the extra work because saying no feels dangerous, especially if it's a big, prestigious brand. And there's also internal dimensions. So some charities still undervalue their own brand. This came up quite a lot. That can lead to, the giving away of logos, bespoke activity in the hope that income materializes, and it often doesn't. So, yeah, the power imbalance is definitely real.
I saw a post on LinkedIn recently. I can't remember the company, but they were like, woohoo, look how many hundreds of thousands of charities applied for our £5,000 pot. And now we've supported one, with absolutely no recognition that what they were doing were wasting hundreds of thousands of hours of charity time that cost a lot more than £5,000. And it was just very frustrating to read. And of course, because it was on my LinkedIn feed, it was filled with people calling it out, but it was still frustrating.
It happens too frequently still. And I think this is one of the things that I talk about in the report. I think that there's a responsibility on both sides here, actually. Of course, there is this responsibility on corporates not to do that. It doesn't make sense. It's not a good use of charity time. It's wildly inefficient. And I don't actually necessarily think it leads to them choosing the best partners either. But also there is a responsibility on charities to say no to things that don't make sense to them and to empower their fundraisers to say no to things that don't make sense to them. So really trying to move away from this, here's an opportunity, we have to go for it because we've got a big target, actually being a bit more critical around the kind of opportunities you go for. Does it fit with our strategy? Does it align with our values? Is it a good use of our time? Do we have the capacity and resource to go for this? What kind of pressure is this going to put on the organisation? Answering some of these questions before applying for everything, I think would help. And as charities, we've got to take some of that responsibility on ourselves to say, no, that's not right for us.
So if someone is listening and thinking of investing in corporate fundraising for their organisation, what's the one thing you'd want them to understand before they start?
I think for me, it's that corporate fundraising is leadership work, not just fundraisers' work. It's so critical. If you want to succeed, you can't just hire a corporate fundraiser and hand them a target. You've really got to be clear on what your funding needs are, what a good fit partnership looks like for your mission, ensuring that you've given your team the time, the tools, and the backing to pursue values-aligned partnerships and to stand behind them when they say no to things, rather than putting pressure on to apply for everything. So the question really isn't how quickly can we get a big corporate partner? It's, are we willing to make the strategic choices and investments that make those partnerships possible?
Brilliant. Oh, thank you so much, Rachel. That was really insightful. Great to have you on.
It's been great to be on. Thanks so much.
My name is Hiran Nadia, and today I'm a senior marketing leader for a big fashion brand. So more than this, I've been in the industry for over a decade. So I've been a founder of a business, I've been a client, I've been a consultant, and I've worked a lot with charity partnerships. I've been fortunate enough to experience all sides of the table.
So, Hiran, the £1,000,000 question: is the corporate world full of cash they're just desperate to give to the next charity who asks for it?
Now, I would love to say yes to that, but the answer probably isn't quite so simple. It probably was that way maybe about 10 years ago, and there was an opportunity. But the truth is that since the pandemic, especially, and there's been a lot of challenges since Brexit, since 2015, everyone's struggling with money, whether we're individuals or businesses or charity partners. And so the effect of the economy in general has an impact on all of us, not just our personal wallets, but also the wallets and budgets of the businesses that we run as well. So a lot of it has been about making really tough choices and being very transparent. Many people I work with across the industry have just been really focused on keeping their jobs, basically. So they're looking after their teams, they're protecting their people, they're protecting the investments and the marketing spend in their clients and their customers. So it's not for want of not wanting to give more. The desire is there. It just isn't always possible because times are really tough. That's not to say that we don't give anything away, because I think that there's still opportunities for charity partners and all sorts of partnerships across the industry, but we're just being a bit more targeted and a bit more specific. So we're making slightly tougher choices than we would have done maybe 10 years ago.
So, what are corporates actually looking for? What would you advise a charity who is making one of these approaches to a corporate partner?
The best corporate partnerships that I've worked on and the best charity partnerships I've worked with is all about solving the same problems that we're solving as a business. So that doesn't necessarily mean we're both doing the same thing, but it's about talking to the same person and having a similar message and working together. So most corporate partners that I know about will be about extending their reach, whether it's internally with their employees or whether externally with their customers or clients. And so it's helping us to do something that we wouldn't have the credibility to do by ourselves. So the best set of partnerships that I have worked on and have had the pleasure of seeing are when those values of each set of people in those organizations are aligned. So you're both trying to tackle the same problem together. Neither one of you is trying to undercut each other or take each other for granted. And we should be better at that. There's an opportunity for all of us there to be better. But what the best partnerships are about respecting each person in the domain as an expert. So each organization has credibility in what they do, and the partnership enhances both of those things together. So if you ask me the question about what we're actually looking for, I think the single most important piece of advice I can give is to understand what the company is for, what the purpose and mission is, why we're doing what we're doing, and seeing if that vision aligns. So does it make sense for you to solve a part of that mission or work together? And if you can't answer that question or it doesn't make sense, then it probably won't make sense to us either.
Yeah, interesting. So one of the things I do is I'm an MBTI facilitator, so Myers-Briggs, and one of the things I've really been struck by, I mean, I saw it throughout my MBA as well, was this difference in communication styles between charities and corporates. In MBTI, it comes down to the T versus F kind of difference. So it's basically that I see charities often making compelling moral arguments. You know, this is the impact on people. This is unfair. This is awful. We have to help this person. And that is something that potentially corporates can be quite unmoved by, that style. They might be looking for facts, figures, and be less swayed by the moral arguments and the personal impact. And I think this can contribute to these negative perceptions that both can have of each other. You know, corporates are evil and charities are warm and fuzzy but unprofessional. You know, both aren't fair assessments of each other, but I don't know, I feel that connection between that communication. Do you see that divide in how corporates and charities communicate and how they perceive each other?
It's the classic trope, isn't it? That we're the bad guys with all the money and the charity partners are the good guys trying to do the good. I think there are partnerships that I've seen where that has happened, and it's not pretty. So corporates come across looking like they don't care, and they're frustrated with charity partners who aren't helping them do what they want to do internally, and therefore then it feels like you're trying to put a round peg in a square hole. And then charity partners look at that and think, well, you never really wanted to work with us in the first place. You're just in it for the money, and you want to use our name to kind of be better and make more money. And so then it becomes really transactional. It's not a nice situation to be in because it's hard to kind of come back from that process. But for me, I think based on what you were sharing around personality types, I think it's really simple for me that the incentives of a corporate versus a charity partner, and I'm speaking specifically from a marketing perspective, are probably just slightly different. So we make too many assumptions on both sides and we don't ask enough questions. And actually, there's a lot that we have in common. We just never get to that point because we're both trying to drive forward the specific thing that we're after. So I think brand people in general, the ones that I've worked with, they're generally business people. Even though they work on these amazing emotional campaigns, often their work is in the details behind the scenes. So they think in numbers, objectives, outcomes. They're thinking about how they can take learnings forward and do it again. If you do something really great, you've got to try and figure out how to repeat that miracle and start again. Whereas with charity partners, I felt that they're really empathetic people. They've got much more emotional intelligence than us. They're generally better storytellers. And so they bring something different to the table. And so that's where sometimes you have a disconnect. We're really focused on what the outcome is. And the charity partners, when they come in to pitch to us, are really focused on what the storytelling is, even though they've got this great tranche of data and facts and figures behind what they do, because they have to do that for their trustees and for their boards. We don't always see that. So the thing that we have in common that I think we really need to focus on, if we put our organizational hats to one side, is that both individuals or groups in that situation, they want to make a difference. They want to do a good thing. You don't sit down with a charity partner 99% of the time unless you are invested in their development and you want them to do well. So we just have to focus more on the fact that we're all human beings. We care. We want to do good work. We want to learn and grow and support people. So my firm belief, I don't think it's very controversial, but it may come across that way, is that most people come to work to try and do a good job. They're not evil. Organization sometimes can restrict you from the things that you want to do, but good professionals find a way around it, both sides. It's just about figuring out how your story and your storytelling, your narrative adapts to that audience. So how do you get them to help you? And if that means being more focused on the facts and figures for those initial conversations, and then the outcome of the case studies being the follow-up of the storytelling for your internal work, for your trustees and boards, there's a way to make it work. It's just we have to realize that we're kind of servants to different masters. So there's got to be a way in between. That means that we get what we want, you guys get what you want, and both of us work together.
Yeah. I mean, I do think there's this fundamental difference between charities and corporates that are about the bottom line. You know, the bottom line of a charity is impact, and the money is a means to an end to achieve that impact. Whereas for corporate, the profit is the bottom line, and the impact is a means to an end to achieve that profit. And it's funny, you see, you know, trustees on boards that don't quite get their heads around that. You see, I think sometimes staff of charity staff of corporates, you know, it's just this fundamental difference that does mean that we approach things with a very different angle at times. And I just wish we could be a bit more open about the fact that this isn't wrong. It's different for a reason, but we might have to find that common ground, as you say. One of the things I see a lot of is companies of all sizes going always for the big guns, the cancer research, the Macmillan, and smaller charities that actually might be a better corporate fit, kind of not really getting their foot in the door there. So, and, you know, I have advised smaller kind of boutique kind of organizations to think about supporting charities of a, you know, smaller size, because they probably get more out of the partnership. But how can small charities compete with this? How can they get in and kind of perform on a level that would give them a chance to get the kind of support that cancer research and Macmillan might get really easily from smaller organizations?
It's a really interesting one because my view on this has changed. I think it really reflects the size of each organization, reflects what scale and resources they can provide. So if you're going after a big FTSE 100 company, a big bank, an insurance company, a fashion brand, they think in a way that reflects how they work, which is around scale and resources. So they're not talking to a small number of people. They're often talking to hundreds of thousands, millions of people in lots of different places. They're working for brands that have existed for a very long time. So they are looking for charity partners that can generally deliver at that scale, whether it's 10 to 15,000 employees or 100,000 employees in their businesses across the country or across multiple markets. And they're looking to see if a charity partner can do the same or at least scale to that point. So if you have the resources and the capacity to do so, then you put yourself in with a great chance to kind of build a relationship with these guys. However, if you don't, you're putting yourself in a really tricky situation where the expectation from the corporate will be quite high and you may not be in a position to deliver in the best way. So like everything that we do and every business I've worked in, from startup all the way through to the big company I work for now, you got to start small and scale from there. So if you can make a partnership work with, for example, a local business or a community group or a chamber of commerce or a regional brand, and prove kind of that the product works, that you can work with employees, that you can create resources, that you can really deliver impact and value for your trustees and your clients and the people that you're trying to deliver impact for, then that's kind of easy to prove to a corporate. You can turn around and say, well, actually, before we came to you, we tried this with 15 businesses in our local area, and all of them are delivering great impact. We've built all of these great relationships. And over time, those types of signals and success stories really add up. So my suggestion is, if you really have the capacity and the ambition and the resource to deliver for a big company, then go and do it. Put that proposal in and really put yourself out there. If you're hesitant about it, or you're looking to build some of that experience, you want to test things and get it wrong and learn and make mistakes and not feel like you are, have a brand name on the door that you're constantly having to deliver against, because partnerships can suck the life out of stuff if it doesn't necessarily go the right way. You can do good at a really small scale. So for me, you'll get there. It's a 10-year plan to become or a 20-year plan to become a cancer researcher or a Macmillan. It's not impossible. It just takes a lot of work. And my suggestion is take some time to think about whether that's the right thing for you, because it actually might be better or more impactful at a smaller scale.
Another complaint that charities often make is that they get these corporates, often smaller organizations, coming to them often around kind of the end of year and saying, oh, cool, we'd really like a day maybe painting your hall or doing your gardening. And the charities, they're going, and you want to come for free and take some photos, and this is going to take our time and our money, and it's an expensive thing. But actually what that charity would have probably benefited more from was actually if you could let your IT guy come and spend a day a month with us, that would really help. Or perhaps your HR person could be supporting our HR person, or those kind of in-kind donations. We get a huge amount of judgment in the charity sector about spending on overheads, so to speak. And actually having companies give that professional staff time would be much more appealing. And so I think there's this disjoint between what companies seem to be offering to charities and what they need. So, is there appetite for companies to be doing that kind of thing more effectively, do you think?
Yes, is the answer. I think if there's the opportunity to have that conversation, I don't think many corporates know that this type of support would be valuable to their charity partners that they work with. I think what you're describing is about kind of engagement, employee engagement, and how we can build stronger and deeper partnerships together. Like, money is always going to be an important thing. It's the thing that keeps the lights on. It's the thing that you can easily compare value with, but there's always more that you can ask for. But I'd love the opportunity for our team, especially the team that I work with across borders, to be able to go and spend time with the charity and share some of their knowledge as part of their working day, and that be useful and a value add. In the same way, I'd love one of our charity partners to come in and speak to us about how they work and what they do beyond just the impact, because it's only then that you understand what the overheads drive. Overheads is an ugly word, unfortunately. It really focuses on, it's a word that's in an accounting book based on cost. So it's often seen as a very negative thing. What we're really talking about when we discuss overheads is all the ingredients you need for each set of teams to do their jobs and to deliver that impact. And it's often the bit that's not seen. So I would definitely recognize there's work to do for us as corporates and as partners to go beyond tree planting and painting fences. Like, it's the easy option. It's a bit of a get out of jail free card, and it looks nice in a corporate report. But if you've got a corporate partner or a business who's looking to do that, there's definitely that springboard there to have a conversation.
Yeah, it's funny. I read Start With Why by Simon Sinek earlier in the year, and I just wanted to scream the whole time because I'm just there going, not once does he talk about how charities have this down completely. This is how we do strategic planning. We start with why. It's the core of everything we do. And I'm there going, this guy has written this book, and all these corporates are like, wow, what a great idea. Get some charity people in to talk about how having a vision and a mission can drive you. And also the value of values itself. Corporates tend to see that more as just a branding thing. In the charity sector, it's much more embedded throughout every different type of work that we do. So yeah, I would love to see corporates recognizing some of the brilliant things that charities can do, and learning from them as well. Absolutely. So last question, what one piece of advice would you give to any charity listening?
So this is the piece of advice I always give, and it sometimes goes down well and sometimes doesn't go down so well. So I'll leave it up to people listening to decide how they take it. I would ask all of the charity partners to just for a second put all of the presentation decks, the cause, the mission, the stakeholders, the org structure, the everyday things to one side for 1 second. Just close their eyes and think about why they turn up to work and what they do every day. That reason, that why we just talked about, that Simon Sinek is an expert in describing, is exactly the reason why businesses partner with charities. The one thing I think charity partners miss, and I actually think partners across organizations when they're trying to work with big businesses, is the process. Like, how are you going to show up? How does your team work together? How are you going to make it happen again and again? How are you going to scale it? And I think most of the charity partners that have pitched us in the past 12 to 18 months, some have been more successful than others. They're so focused on their why and the upfront story and who they're doing it for that they sometimes forget that part is not really connected to us. We're connected to you, who will then go and deliver that work. And we have to have confidence that you have the process, the resources, the thinking, and the structure in place to be able to do that. And so the hardest thing I have to sometimes say to people is, I would love to work with you, but you're just not set up for success. So it's not fluffy. It's quite process driven and quite specific. But I think if we're talking about a recommendation that would really help, hopefully, the next set of charities to kind of find their new corporate partners, really focus on how you're going to deliver, because that's the question I get asked when I go back to work every day.
Yeah. And I do think it helps to combat this assumption that we're seeing a lot amongst people who aren't particularly experienced in corporate fundraising, that it's just going to be money given to you, like a grant, like a donation, and that's not going to be how it works. And I think that's, the podcast is looking at, is this the golden goose? And it's absolutely not. It's a complicated, intense path to go down. There is potential partnerships there, but it's not going to be something that will just land in your lap with a few phone calls. And I think that's such an important message to get out. So thanks so much, Hiran, for coming on the podcast.
Pleasure.
Well, you heard it here first. Corporate fundraising is not the quick charity-saving win we'd all love for it to be, but it's also not an avenue that's totally without hope.
Yeah, I absolutely loved Rachel's emphasis that corporate fundraising is a leadership challenge. It needs to be thought about strategically, not just whack a target on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a common challenge with fundraising of all kinds. Fundraising only ever works when the entire charity is connected to it. I've said before, the fundraisers are like the canary in the mine. They'll start to struggle to fundraise when things start to go wrong, whether that's because, the impact data isn't convincing, or the governance challenges mean the annual reports are delayed or substandard, or where the strategy doesn't link up. Clearly, with corporate fundraising, those connections are as important as ever.
Yeah, and I really loved what Andy was saying, in particular, his honesty that companies don't have to give. If they're deciding to, it has to be with clear benefit in mind. And let's look at from the other side of the fence for a minute, that life is hard for everyone. We know life is incredibly tough in the charity world, but it's worth recognising that life isn't always easy in business too. So being a successful, competitive business is no mean feat. And when times are tough, businesses have to focus on making profit. Otherwise, they have nothing to give. So it's a tricky environment for corporate fundraising.
I do find that this is so fascinating, this misunderstanding between corporates and charities and how that impacts us in lots of different ways in the sector. This idea that charities are good and moral, but seen as unprofessional and woolly by corporates. I mean, we literally were taught that during my MBA, or that corporates are effective and slick, but evil and cold-hearted, according to charities. Yeah, and we see that in the conflict between staff and trustees quite a lot as well. When corporate trustees, people with corporate background, come onto a board and they make assumptions about the relevance of their corporate knowledge, or they underestimate their staff, or when staff made assumptions about trustees and their values. It's all around us. And I think it's a surprisingly significant hurdle we need to get over.
Yeah, purpose and professionalism are for both charities and businesses. And I'd like to stick my neck out and suggest that we should kill Charity of the Year and digging and decorating approach to corporate partnerships. I hear so much about them all the time. And in my view, these approaches are one way, they're superficial, and they don't deliver enough value for the majority of businesses and charities. And there's definitely a place for rolling up your sleeves and giving time to charities, but it's got to be forged from a much closer relationship and better understanding of what charities really need and how both parties will benefit. I think charity partnerships of the year can be very lucrative, but for very few charities. And I really don't like the way that they are a competitive beauty contest, which charities have to invest so much time and effort in, often with little chance of success.
I obviously agree. 100%. I had a charity of the year partnership once when I led this small aviation charity, and it was a big, glossy private jet company with just millions and millions, and they promised a series of fundraising activities they were going to do with their staff throughout the year. And all I had to do was drive the 3-hour round trip once a quarter to go to their meetings, discuss their ideas, support the team. It took me most of a day each time, and, all on the charity's dime. And at the end of the year, they sent us £76. It didn't even cover the petrol, let alone my time. And it was such a disappointment, because every time you'd be there was all this enthusiasm, but it was really not well thought through and didn't understand the impact on the charities. But it was all over their promotional material. But since then, I have to be honest, I've had some corporate partnerships that were brilliant. So like Tatty Devine and the Fawcett Society, when I was there as interim CEO, that was such a great partnership. As for those who don't know, Tatty Devine's like an edgy jewelry maker. And the Fawcett Society is, of course, the leading gender equality charity. And Tatty Devine did a whole series of feminist pieces, which gave a decent donation for each sale to the Fawcett Society. And in that role, I had a lot of media opportunities. So I wore their jewelry every time I was on TV. It was a really great partnership. And I still have a bunch of really cool feminist jewelry from that partnership. So it reminds me of it quite regularly. So where to from here, Chris?
No pressure. Well, let's end on a positive. Let's agree that businesses and charities are going to work together much more closely from now on. We'll work to understand each other. We'll both invest time in appreciating where we're coming from and commit to working together with mutual benefit in mind. And I love Hiran's idea that the best corporate partnerships are solving a shared problem. This, I think, is great corporate fundraising.
Agreed. But one more thing. An absolute ban on anyone suggesting that we call Richard Branson.
I agree.
Thanks to all our guests today, and thanks as always to Benefact for supporting this podcast.